Hello, again. This is not the first time I've video responded to one of your uploads, but I wanted to let you know that I've experienced exactly what you've experienced, and I found it to be very frustrating. Sometimes I feel like a private detective on the trail of a crime when I'm reading the news. I have this RSS feed that comes into Firefox, my browser, and it's just hundreds of stories every hour from all these different blogs and websites that I subscribe to. And they all have these different slants and biases and what they'll show and what they won't show. So I have like 12 windows open. I feel like I'm doing a puzzle, taking all these different pieces and putting them together. And that's if you can find a kernel of information amongst the, Tiger Woods has an affair, John Edwards has an affair, giant dogs eat infants' testicles off, whatever these people think passes for news lately. So you have to dig through all that, and even then, you have to do a lot of assembling and work. And what you said about the bills is very true. Like with the immigration bill, Rachel Maddow describes it as the Papers, Please bill, and you're 100% right. She definitely does paint it up as if officers are going to go find some Hispanic people, some Latinos, and just harass them and demand their immigration papers. And she even said the other night that this is one of those bills where the more you read, the worse it gets. And yet she hasn't read to the audience any of the bill. Not a sentence, not a paragraph, not a clause, absolutely nothing. And yet she's claiming that the more you read it, the worse it gets. And this is such a self-evident truth that she doesn't feel she needs to prove it or back it up or source anything. But one thing that she's talking about that I think is really important when it comes to discussion of this immigration bill that a lot of people aren't is its ties to the organization FAIR, FAIR, which wrote the legislation and helped pass it. And they have many, many ties to white supremacist groups. They've given lots of money to white supremacist group. Their founder is an ethnic separatist, which is a really nice way of saying white supremacist. And I think it's really important when you're discussing a bill to discuss the people that wrote it. I mean, this is what Glenn Beck feels with the stimulus bill and the healthcare bill. He's always talking about the different advocacy groups that had a part in crafting this bill, but I don't think he's going to do that with the immigration bill and the organization FAIR. And Rachel Maddow is the only person talking about that. On the other hand, I found out from Karl Rove on the O'Reilly factor what you said about the bill is that they already have to be pulled over for committing a crime, and there has to and in order for you to ask them for their immigration papers if the officer has a suspicion that they're here illegally, which you're not supposed to do on race, but we know a lot of officers are going to do that. It's definitely open to that kind of abuse. But I don't like to find myself in this position. I was raised a Democrat. I live in a leftist household. I don't like to find out information from Karl Rove on the O'Reilly factor. This is not what I want my reliable news source to be. I mean, but there's a lot of problems with their media when it comes to this issue, and the most bottom rung of that is ineptitude, which is the journalist or the reporter is an idiot and they don't understand the story, so they're not going to be able to explain it to you very well. And the other end is it's not kosher with my political ideology, and therefore I'm not gonna cover it. And this is like the lie of exclusion, which is the commentators and the reporters get to pick and choose the kernels of truth that they want to talk about. Now, you could say this for a lot of stuff like, Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly and how they talk about issues, but I mean, you can do it on the left too, like when we talk about global warming and all these other issues. We're just gonna pick and choose what we like, not even necessarily excluding things that prove it false, but just narratives that aren't convenient. And the other wrong is exclusion of the stories. And this is because it doesn't really seem like it, but all of our different news channels and these different media organizations, they're all really owned by a handful of people. It's only 2 or 3 mega corporations that control the media in this country. So if they decide that they want to collude and exclude a story for nefarious purposes or any other reason, they can easily do that. And I find myself in this strange position where I live in New Hampshire, the United States, and I'm going to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, to find out information about the United States. I'm getting credible USA news from Britain because the American media has decided they're just going to totally cut the story out and not report it for whatever reason it is. And that's why it's interesting if you go to some websites like Top 25 Most Censored News Stories, and they do it for every year. and you're reading them and you're like, wow, these are really important, relevant stories, and they're just not being covered, despite the fact that there's things that this nation really needs to think about and discuss. One example of this is I was reading before the earthquake in Haiti. I was reading this article on the top 25 most censored news stories about American development in Haiti, because of course Haiti is an important military um, strategy point against Cuba. So we've been building a lot of bases there, both the United States and the UN. We're kicking people out of their homes and demolishing residential neighborhoods to build bases, as well as I think at least 2 churches have been demolished. And soon after I was reading this, because I'm a little late in getting to some of this stuff. Um, the earthquake in Haiti happened, and I was trying to find out how much damage the American military bases sustained, and if we lost any service members down there, and how badly the UN was hit. And the media wasn't discussing the ramifications of the earthquake on that because they weren't even talking about the fact that we were there with military bases. So they're not exactly going to do a story on how the earthquake has affected our military bases and our servicemen over in Haiti. But I agree with you completely on how people don't talk about what's in these bills. And as a college student, I wish I had the time to go read through a 300-page PDF and come to my own conclusions on a lot of this stuff. And I really would if I had the opportunity and the time, but I don't. So it's nice when people actually talk about what's in the bill. And when someone says something like, "This bill, the more you read it, the worse it gets," reads us some of the bill to illustrate this point. I don't think that's a ridiculous request. It's extremely frustrating what's going on in the media, and it's all crap. And I think everyone knows it's crap, and that's why they can't sell newspapers. That's why nobody watches MSNBC except for me, and I feel lonely when I watch it. I feel like I can hear crickets chirping over the speakers of my television when I'm watching MSNBC because it's all crap and everybody knows it. And some of it is just ineptitude. Some of it is bias. A lot of it is purposeful. And certainly there are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there who think there's a lot of people high up that want to keep us ignorant. I personally think it's the consumer's fault. Most people want to hear about Tiger Woods. They just want to hear the sensationalist things about the bill. They don't want it read to them because they don't have the stomach for it. They don't have the patience for it. And they just want something that's flashy and more interesting. So I can't really blame the news media in most cases. In some of the cases where they're excluding stories, you have to blame the news media because they have their own purposes. But mostly I blame the consumers because the news media is giving us what we want. I mean, we want ratings. If you look at why Fox's ratings are so much better than everybody else's, is because they understand that media is entertainment, whether it's news media or not. And the other ones won't embrace that, and yet at the other hand, they won't be real journalists either. So I agree with you completely. I find it very frustrating, but I subscribe to your channel, and you talk about a lot of stuff other people aren't or aren't properly discussing. So thank you for that, and keep doing the good work.